Hello, welcome to Böll.Global, a new beginning for Syria. How can it succeed? My name is Leila Al-Zubeidi, and Böll.Global is an online series in which we bring together international and German experts to discuss current issues. And today we want to speak about Syria. For more than half a century, the regime of the Assad family, which has ruled Syria with extreme brutality, has finally been overthrown on December 8 by militias led by Islamist rebels, together with Kurdish and Druze forces. And for Syrians in and outside the country, it has been highly emotional 10 days. A Syrian wrote on Twitter or X, "We are measuring our liberation prison by prison, not town by town." This is the story of Syria in a nutshell. Syrians have been rejoicing at the liberation of prisoners and at the reunion of families. However, they're also shocked at how small the numbers of survivors is. Approximately 100 to 130,000 persons remain missing. 10,000s of families are still searching for them and feel re-traumatized by the view of mass graves. And the society, of course, remains terribly scarred. Almost 500,000 Syrians have been killed in the war, over 1 million injured, and over 12 million, roughly half of the population, have been displaced. But hopes for a better future run high. Given the large number of internal and external actors with diverse interests, the task to create a democratic, inclusive, and stable future is, of course, enormous and full of hurdles. But at the same time, civil society in and outside of Syria has already done important groundwork on human rights, on women's rights, on trust building between minorities, on transitional justice and accountability. And they've also worked on the day after roadmap scenarios and have sketched a better future out for Syria. And I'm very happy to be joined by guests who have been working hard for a new beginning in Syria. I would like to welcome Razan Rashidi. She's executive director of the Syria Campaign, a human rights organization dedicated to assisting the battle of Syrians for freedom, justice, and democracy. Heroes, you call them on your website. Prior to that, Razan worked as a media specialist for different organizations and for UN agencies in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. She came to Berlin in 2016 and used to visit Syria up to until 2019. And I have to say that I'm quite moved to have you here, Razan, and to introduce you by your real name, because you haven't spoken in public and using your name for long, long years. So it's quite special to us to host you. I welcome Mohammed Al-Attar. He's a Syrian playwright and dramaturg. His theater plays have been performed in different European countries, in the US and the Middle East. He has also written a lot of journal articles, and much of his work deals with the fates of Syrian refugees, prisoners, and women. He has been called an important chronicler of oppression and war-torn Syria, and he left Damascus for Beirut in 2012 and came to Berlin in 2015. And I would like to welcome my colleague Bente Scheller here at the Foundation, where she heads the Middle East and North Africa department. Bente is a renowned expert on Syria. She worked at the German embassy in Syria between 2002 and 2004, and she authored the bestseller, The Wisdom of Syria's Waiting Game, Foreign Policy Under the Assads. So welcome to the three of you. First of all, congratulations to both of you, Razan and Mohammed. Mabruk. To start off, I would like to ask each of you, how do you feel right now? What has changed for you, and what are you busy with right now, both personally and professionally? Maybe Razan, you start.
Thank you, Leila, for this introduction and for arranging this timely discussion. It's great to be here, and as Leila said, it's also a bit emotional because I've always used the pseudonym for security reasons, because of fear of the Assad regime, because of the fear of ending up in the prisons that were liberated. I think, it's very difficult to assess my feeling, it's been a roller coaster actually of emotions, ups and downs. Definitely the ups are for ending dictatorship, a war criminal, not only for Syria but for the whole humanity. In my organization, we've been fighting impunity, and we will continue actually to fight impunity. We can speak about this later. So it feels good to sleep. It took me a couple of days in order to be able to sleep, but then one night I kind of said like, "Khalas, Assad is gone." That said, going back to the roller coaster of emotions, we as the Syria campaign work a lot with families of the disappeared, families of, for example, a movement called Families for Freedom. They're like the mothers of Plaza del Mayo in Argentina or the Saturday moms in Turkey. And given that we connect with them on a daily basis, and even our own team members and our own families are still searching for any information about the missing people, there is a missed kind of full joy that we are experiencing on a daily basis. Uh, we're busy helping the families and pressuring the UN and ICRC and other international humanitarian actors to take responsibility. We are also busy following up on the current regulations or maybe principles that the HTS appointed new governing body is practicing, and specifically on the participation of women in terms of campaigns. Those are our two campaigns. I'm gonna stop here and maybe pass it on to Muhammad, and then we can discuss it further.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you very much for hosting this and organizing this. I will actually I resonate with many things that Razan mentioned. I have to say also, it's for me personally, at least, it's hard to separate the personal from the professional these days. But yes, it's. I have to admit, I still, after we've been now, I don't like more than 10 days than the Assad runaway. I still cannot find words to describe what I feel, mainly because I'm experiencing also new emotions and this roller coaster that Razan also mentioned. I was speaking to a dear friend. He's a writer and director. He's in Damascus, and he told me yesterday, because he was telling me the same. We were exchanging this. Let me put it like this: an ability to express what we feel. And he said to me, "I feel that I'm under shock." And I actually, it struck me this term. And I think maybe we are all still under shock somehow, because we have to, putting things in context, this regime has been ruling Syria for 55 years almost. And it's not just the last bloody 14 years, but it's even, yeah, it's this more than half a century. So we are speaking about generations who born and raised knowing only Syria, the Assad. And as Razan mentioned also, maybe I elaborate briefly, the regime in the last few years seemed to be more immune, and the appetite for normalization with the regime was growing. And not just 2 weeks before, or 10 days maybe before he ran away, Assad, I mean, he was hosted in this big summit in Riyadh, the Islamic Arabic Summit, and he was welcomed and he gave a speech. So yeah, I think we can use personally. I when my friend from Damascus mentioned this being under shock, I think I resonate with that too. So and I resonate with also the roller coaster that Razan mentioned. Saying all of that, I'm of course I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but I want to be optimistic, and I think optimism in this context now is also a decision. It's not just a mood. We need to be optimistic because this is an immense thing for Syrians and beyond Syria also. And it opened, definitely, it opened up a window for hope. And knowing that what will come will be difficult and it won't be easy, but we know that now we have this open, we have this concrete chance to move forward and to proceed for something that we hope will be better.
Thank you very, very much to both of you. And I think I should actually also congratulate Bente, because you've been advocating against normalization for years, and it wasn't always a popular position. And I think that your position has been vindicated now. But I would like to go back to Razan, because you already started talking about your work. Let's talk about your work a little bit. Syria Campaign advocates for democratic political transition and also calls to reactivate the stalled UN process. Can you talk about that a little bit? Where is Syrian society standing there? Where is the process standing? And how can or should Germany and the EU support all of this?
Thank you, Leila. And I want to join you in congratulating Bente. I was just telling her, like, I was texting her like hours, like even like minutes after I confirmed Assad was ousted. I think what talks about our work is really the one thing that gives me hope and joy. As Muhammad said, there's a lot of that, which is the Syrian civil society and the Syrian people, the Syrian civilians. I just want to stress that the Assad did not flee or was not ousted only because of the last 11 days military operation that was led by specific armed groups, armed opposition groups. Assad is gone because of really people like me and Muhammad, and I'm proudly saying that it is because of the civil society actors, people who believed in human rights, journalists who've documented, atrocities and daily lives in Syria. It's because of the victims who survived, the doctor who supported from underground hospitals, the teachers who continued to teach children in besieged areas for years. It is really that movement for justice and not giving also hope when everyone else told us, oh, Razan, you need to be realistic, like you need to shake hands with somehow like, the representatives of the regime in order to reach some information. And I think not losing that hope and that like compass of values, I would say, the early values of the 2011 revolution, which I've participated in, and I was in the streets in Damascus, and I think that narrative as well is very important to tell, and it tells like it answers your question, Leila, about my work. This is what we do at the Syria campaign. Since we're created actually a vehicle to help Syrian, as you said, like we call them heroes, such as the white helmets or the doctors I talked about, or the teachers who continue to work, in very, very difficult conditions, or even the refugees. Let's not forget also, I forget to say, it's millions or like hundreds of refugees or thousands who took to the sea and died, trying to find better lives for their families, but also continuing to advocate and to support, the vision for free, democratic, and pluralistic Syria. So we like what we try to do is to tell the world like it's not, because there was a period where it's either Assad or ISIS, and now I'm a bit worried as well that this is how the whole media is covering the Syria story. It's those like armed groups who have just won the last or like hit the last strike. So in my organization, the Syria Campaign, we try to make sure that the voices of victims and survivors and the heroes, which we also connect with on a daily basis, are heard. The international community is hearing from them. The international media is covering their story and not just going to men with arms. I just want to give an example that relates to Germany about our work. I'm not sure if the audience have heard of the trial that tried an ex-officer in one of those security apparatus that you are today seeing being freed, or seeing the horrific footage that we are seeing. Anwar Ruslan, he was trialed in the city of Koblenz. So the media would mainly talk about him as a male figure who mainly like committed atrocity. Our work is to make sure that the media and the international audience as a movement understand that behind that is the story of the family. So changing that even image on a kind of Der Spiegel article from a photo of a male who committed atrocities to the active women and families who are, caring for their loved ones and asking, for information about their loved ones. I'm gonna stop here, but maybe I can elaborate later.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe you can just add a little bit on the UN process that has been stalled.
Yeah.
Is
Sorry,
something happening there?
yeah. Okay. So again, I think it is very important, as I said, to recognize that the current governing body in Syria is like has been appointed by this one-armed group. But that said, there is a lot of work that have been done in the past. Like for me, I think, and I urge, and when you said what Germany can do, I urge everyone like not to feel, now Syria, let's start. We've been doing a lot of work in the past 14 years. There have been a lot of work by civil society, even by political um, activists, by artists like Muhammad and others. And we have a UN Security Council resolution 2254. There have been a lot of debate today, and honestly, like it is very clear in terms of values and ethics and principles that this is somehow the vision of the Syria we want. Um, that said, like more recently in the past 2 days, there have been a lot of misinformation among Syrian communities on what does that mean and what does this UN resolution mean. I would say that we would maybe reconsider like, editing it or reproposing a new text that is in line with the current situation, just to tackle the misinformation, disinformation. And this is, again, something we work on a lot at the Syria campaign. And we're calling for that political transition to be, again, to reflect on the fact that the Syria we want is not the Syria that would be appointed as a result of a military operation, but the Syria that we have as a movement for justice, as a movement for freedom, have envisaged even 14 years ago. I hope that answers your question. I just wanted to add one
Yes.
thing about our work, which relates a lot to Bente's amazing work, again, like challenging disinformation and normalization in general that was happening. We've also worked a lot on pressuring social media companies and tech companies in order to make sure that they respect the experiences of the survivors of war crimes. And I do believe that this is very important for the future of the country. It's very important to the peace building, to the process of transitional justice. And our research and our work have always showed not only the Russian supported disinformation, like huge disinformation campaigns, but also the impact of disinformation on people, on civilians. And I'm keen now for the future as an organization to continue to make sure that, like, to kind of help victims and survivors and preserve the narrative of victim and survivors, which as I said is key to transitional justice and peace building in the future Syria.
Yeah, we will get back to that later on. But I would also like to ask a question about the economy, because we mostly focus on the political situation, but the economic situation is really dire. About 90% of the population lives below the poverty line. More than half cannot even afford or access quality food. 15 million people depend on humanitarian aid to survive. So are you also focusing on the situation? Because I'm also hearing, how can we actually think about democracy in a time where we're still thinking about where to get our food from and so forth. How are you addressing this?
I think this is exactly what Assad wanted us to do when he like besieged us and prevented us from the basic livelihoods and used aid as a weapon of war to stop thinking about freedom or your opinion or women's right or LGBTQI rights, which I personally was engaged in even pre-2011. And we will not do that. And the women of Syria specifically, I would say, and the movement of justice, I think, realizes that democracy brings a good economy, and that democratic practices are the key to evolving economic situation. And that said, I think it's very important, as you said, Leila, to recognize the horrific and very, very dire situation that 99% of the population live in. Even for me, as someone who've been following up on a daily basis, my organization name is called the Syria Campaign. So everything I do is around Syria and around human rights violation and documentation in Syria. And I'm shocked to see the image of destruction of, because drones were not allowed, they were forbidden, like you could not film from the sky. And today, like I'm seeing whole neighborhoods that we've saw like from the ground a little bit, but we haven't been seeing from the sky are destroyed. The number of people who are internal refugees, internal displaced people who are trying to go back is huge as well, but they don't have anywhere to live in. There's schools that need to be rebuilt. Our health system, which actually, like, 10% of the German doctors, this is the latest news, are Syrians. So like we have 5,000 doctors in Syria. This is an example how much also the people who have been pushed away. So I do believe that there needs to be a lot of support, but the same way we urged the international humanitarian community, and I myself was a huge advocate for that back in the days in 2011, please don't parachute aid. It's not about, a couple of airplanes or, that can bring some food. This is a very vibrant community that, survived all those years with very innovative solution, with the ability to recover. And I'm sure many of the, like from the Syrians who sought refuge in Germany, many of them have found solutions to start small businesses, etc. We do have agricultural um, resources, and for me it needs to be really like an early recovery type of programming. It also needs to take into consideration, if we speak specifically about Germany, collaboration, thinking together, like how the expertise and the 1 million refugees who are living in Germany can help also build Syria. We can speak about that later on in details. I'm really like just waiting for that program that will tell every Syrian doctor in Germany, you have the right to work for 1 month in rebuilding your own country's health system, for example. Like, how can we think together in terms of building that economy? And I really have trust in Syrian people, like when it comes to building the economy and recovery, like if that's the word, like recovery.
Thank you, Razan. Mohammed, let's speak about your work. Your work is very much about the meaning of expression. Syria under the Assads has been called the kingdom of silence. At the same time, the Syrian revolution started with a graffiti and has been accompanied by cartoons, by murals, literature, and music also has been very important to mobilize and encourage people during the early days of the uprising, which was still hopeful, but also then later on when it came to dealing with the trauma of war, detention, and torture. And as an artist, you have worked on these themes for more than a decade. And you've also used different ways of expression. You've used Greek mythology, you've used lay actors, and so forth. How do you see your role at this moment in time, which is a huge change?
Thank you, Leila. For the first time, I would like to see my role as a citizen, also a citizen and artist. It's I've never been a citizen. I mean, I born and raised and lived in Syria. I'm 44 years old now, and this is the first time I want to see my role as an artist citizen also. So and again, for me, this is inseparable. This is the start for me. In terms of practice, in terms of things that how we will use our tools, I have to admit that for now I'm observing and trying to comprehend what the unfolding events. Razan mentioned something about seeing footages of Syria from the sky. I was thinking about this yesterday, actually. I was thinking that this is the first time I see a drone footage, really, like from citizen journalists, from journalists, from people, from activists who I know some actually, a couple of them who are now on the ground, and this tells a lot. We are also how to say we are. This started with 2011, the revolution. We are getting to know our country better, really. I mean, that's why I mentioned this footages from the sky. This is the first time because, as maybe you know, and many of maybe our viewers know, that this was like many other things forbidden in Syria. Everything needed permission, and everything was exclusively in the hands of the security apparatus. So from this, I can of course expand to say that personally, I'm observing, and I need to not impose or not come using again the metaphor of parachute, but this time we speak about cultural practices, to impose things or bring things to where they are maybe not coming from a deep understanding of the needs now. I'm aware, of course, that the priorities for majority of Syrians now, Syrians in Syria, are food and of course of basic needs on a daily basis. But I believe also that art and culture is among these needs. Maybe it's not a priority, and I embrace that and I accept it, but it's also important because it's not just about expressing our views and perspectives, which is extremely important, but also I think because it provides an arena, a democratic arena, as I would like to imagine it, that might be difficult to replicate elsewhere. It's a fragile time in Syria. Yes, it's a time of happiness, but still it's a fragile time. And maybe what the cultural arenas and spaces, like theaters, of course, whether it's happened in conventional spaces or even in alternative spaces, could provide place where people to come together and discuss topics that they are not able to discuss elsewhere. And I like to think about it in this way. Also, I like to think about the role of art and culture and theater specifically in reconciliation, in healing also. And we, of course, we have examples coming from South Africa, from Cambodia, from Rwanda, and elsewhere, also from countries in Latin America, where I think the cultural practices were crucial in this reconciliation process, in how we move forward by maybe forgiving but not forgetting. And this is for me it's an important distinction, because I think the art that I would like to imagine is practicing in Syria is the art that keep the memory alive and keep also the narratives and oral history alive, because without that we will actually fall in another trap of civil violence or forms of civil wars, while at the same time moving forward, of course, is required that we come together and try to heal certain wounds. So I imagine the practices focusing on these aspects in the coming, I hope, maybe months or years. Yeah.
And can it maybe also provide a common language somehow? I mean, Syria is a highly diverse society. It has different ethnic, different cultural, religious groups, different languages, even different cultures from the urban to the rural. Maybe you could also speak a little bit about how do the different communities view the fall of the Assad regime? I mean, there are also fears, but also hopes in every community. I mean, some were maybe surprised to also see the Alawite community on the coast to celebrate the fall of the Assad regime, having been depicted for a long time as the stronghold. And so how do you think that culture and arts can also bring some kind of like a communicative language to bring people together across all these different lines?
I do. I definitely do. And maybe that's why I do what I do also, because I believe in the capacity of art and culture of bringing these communities, and at the same time allowing communities also to demonstrate their specific characteristics, whether it's a language, whether it's cultural identity. So it's not bringing people together or communities together is not to merge them or to impose one narrative or one discourse or one identity. Actually, it's celebrate this richness of different languages and culture, but at the same time to create a space for dialogue and for imagination. As I mentioned in my previous answer, I think the advantage, at least how I like to see it, we have in theater or in art, is that we can really sometimes step over some of the concrete obstacles that are still happening or unfolding in the political arena or in the economical arena, or because we come here to what are our weapons? It's thoughts, and it's also imagination. So sometimes we can be creative in imagining situations, and sometimes we can do that before politicians or legal scholars or human rights activists. We can really imagine situations, and we can push for things forward, not all the time being limited by the obstacles on the ground. It doesn't mean that we ignore these obstacles, otherwise we'll be also just romantic dreamers. No, we are not just that. We need to be a bit a bit utopian, but we are very rooted also in the facts on the ground. So I think we combine both, and that's the things that we can again bring these communities that you mentioned, and try to imagine situation and try to have a safe spaces actually to exchange ideas and to actually disagree, which is also important. Just one thing commenting on these communities. I think this is also, unfortunately, one of the common misunderstandings and analyzing and deconstructing the Syrian regime or the Syrian dynasties. Hopefully, from now on, more experts will be more able to deconstruct this based on a better knowledge. But it's been portrayed as Syria was more or less in the last years approached based on analysis that use sectarian tension as a main factor or one of the biggest factors of the struggle. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I think Syrians know that the Assad regime was relying on a sect, yes, but this sect is Assadism. Really, this is not Alawites or Shias or Christians or any minorities. The Assadism, really, this is the lawyers, people who are defending this regime for their benefits, and were defending this clan for benefits. No doubts. I'm not denying that Assad tried to hijack the Alawites and use them to how to say, to sharpen the sectarian tensions directly or indirectly. But it's a mistake to look at the communities as if they are solid, and each community or each ethnic group or each sect has its very, how to say, solid affiliation. That's not true. There were Alawites, this is well documented, were for years in prisons of Assad. Assad's tortured and killed and imprisoned a lot of Alawites, intellectual, and a lot of Alawites who opposed this dynasty. So this is something also important to know. That's personally, I'm not surprised to see people in the Alawite community in the coastal area celebrating the fall of Assad.
Yes, thank you, Muhammad. Bente, now getting to maybe the political situation when it comes to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Organization for the Liberation of the Levant, or Syria, HTS. It's trying to appear quite pragmatic and moderate. The signs they're sending out is we don't want to impose on women what they have to dress. We are not looking for revenge and so forth. So the first signs are quite encouraging. However, there are also questions emerging about the political appointments they are making, how inclusive the transitional period will be, of different social groups, but also of civil society, of the opposition. Can you give us a sense of the situation? Where do we stand at present, and what does it bode for the near future?
Thank you very much. And I think it's worth mentioning that it has been only 11 days since the regime fell. I know that all these questions are relevant, but I have the feeling that many people already expected from the very beginning, like Sunday the regime vanishes, and on Monday everybody's like, yeah, but where are the answers? And I think we're there to also comment on this. However, I think it's also overwhelming for Syrians, but also for those who have been following, that it's hard to give satisfying answers. And I think I would like to underline one aspect that really counts into how people might be seeing Syria now and judging Syria, because the Assad regime kind of it lived of how it was perceived here. It was perceived as secular, and somehow it came across as if it would have been as if Hafiz al-Assad had invented the peaceful coexistence, and as if it was only possible under his control. And people who constantly told this to us here in events, they pretended it was still the same, that he was just challenged, and he would have been a great ruler if not the revolution had come. And I think this spirit is still there in some conversations, when now people are thinking it will automatically go from bad to worse. I think that there are many things to consider. One is that Golani is a very bright mind, a very sharp mind, and this is why he knows, of course, what is popular to say, how people would think about him, and trying to dismantle these narratives. But then I think there is also some practice that HTS gained in Idlib from governing. It was authoritarian rule, and we still, by the way, have not seen HTS prisons opened. They went from prison to prison and freed the political prisoners, which is excellent. However, they so far missed their own ones. And this teaches us already something about what they lived in practice, and that there is a lot of room to develop a democratic and pluralistic approach. And I think that also some of the comments we've seen by this interim government, there was a comment on, well, women can hold offices, but not all. I mean, they can't, for example, be Minister of Defense or so. So there is the spirit in the interim government appointees that he brought. So far, I have seen only appointees to the interim government that came from Idlib, that served in the government in Idlib, and then some really bizarre appointments of people who, no matter how they in the end behave, their sheer affiliation with Ahrar al-Sham, another Islamist group, or like their sheer appearance will scare people. And it might undermine the future. Plus, they are not capable of running the state. They have too few people to do so, and of course, administration is a huge task. And this is why I think I'm hearing a lot from Damascus how chaotic it all is. That many people who are in positions to do administrative tasks, and they can't do them. They are not able to perform because it's all very messy, and they lack experience, and they lack the sheer qualified people. So there are a lot of question marks regarding, will they be capable to carry out a decent governance and fulfill the part of what they learned, because they learned people need electricity and water and food and basic services. This is what definitely made them more pragmatic when they were governing Idlib. However, I think it's still a far way to go to comply with the needs of Syrians, especially in terms of inclusion, in terms of good governance, transition, and justice. Because also, I think there is no basis for carrying out court cases in Syria that would enable everybody to be held accountable for human rights violations and crimes against humanity in the past. A lot of things to do. I think this is also where I would relate to Razan saying we're not starting from the scratch. Syrians in the diaspora, but also inside Syria, have been working so hard over the past 13 years to make this happen and to envision a future in which they can do this. So I find it really impressive. Just in Germany, if you talk to Syrians, how much has been done already. I think these are the movements now that deserve attention, and that should be invited much more to see how they can be supported in building the state, because it won't be an HTS state. This comment I would like to add. Also, underlining what Razan has said in the beginning, the victory over Assad, it's not an HTS victory. It's a victory of the Syrian people, and a victory first against this incredibly tough regime, and a victory against Russia, and a victory against Iran. I can't imagine any people having come up with such kind of a victory. And it wouldn't have been possible if not hope had come through all the cultural projects, and they served to underline the determination of the Syrian people. The Syrian regime could destroy whole neighborhoods, and so could ISIS, and so could other armed actors. But when then you saw the pictures, you had all the writings on the wall, literally. Like the one graffiti that I remember in one of those ruined places was, "If justice couldn't be achieved, be sure this was not the last attempt." Like, this strength that speaks from it makes me absolutely confident that who overcame Assad and who overcame ISIS and so many other challenges will be able to overcome whatever challenges are posed now by HTS.
Yes, we should remember the resilience of this small village, Kafr Nabil, which became world famous for their murals and their graffitis. And they were besieged and then bombarded, and yet they kept up their very creative resistance. Bente, Razan already mentioned the court cases in Germany. They were worldwide the first court cases against state torture in Syria. How do you think Germany could build on this? Razan has also spoken about the big Syrian diaspora that Germany could use as a resource to build relationships, to build cooperations, probably in the academic sphere and many other spheres. How could Germany use what they have at hand at the moment to support the transition? And should Germany not also exert influence on external actors such as Turkey and Israel to respect Syria's sovereignty at the moment? What do you think Germany can and should do?
Well, I think first of all, Germany should tone down on the rhetorics of can Syrians now go home, especially if the same people who mentioned that Syria will fall apart and it will all become terrible underline, well, now that's the moment to really think about deportations. I think that's a very bad starting point for banking on all the trust and confidence and appreciation that has been built in the past. Second, I'm absolutely astonished hearing the European diplomats going to Damascus, being quoted by the new Syrian interim government should push back on foreign interference. And then when it is detailed what they mean by foreign interference, they mean that HTS should kick out Russia and take the military bases of Russia. I think it's important to do so, obviously, but at a time when Syria in this fragile situation is bombarded by Turkey and has an incursion of Turkey in the Kurdish areas, which is something that is highly dangerous because it is fiddling with internal matters and with Kurdish Arab affairs. So it has the potential to feed into civil war, and it should definitely talk to Israel to not occupy further territory. I mean, the Golan Heights, part of it has already been under occupation since 67, but now to encroach further, go into the buffer zone that is particularly there, so Syrian and Israeli troops don't clash with each other. To also state it will remain forever ours, and to say, well, now we invest hugely in emboldening the settlements and doubling them. What is this as a message? It's really a provocation. It is coming in a fragile moment. And of course, Syrians are afraid that this will end in another land grab, and it might end up as such in the north as well. So I think the same amount of diplomacy that is now invested in telling the new rulers in Syria or the interim rulers how to behave, what to do, what not to do, the same amount of diplomacy should be invested in making sure that this kind of foreign interference ceases. And one particularly terrible act that I found with Israel's engagement was that, first of all, I think there would have been a basis for opening a new page because there were actions in which Israel was crucial in helping, like having treatment for Syrians that were then brought to Israeli hospitals, or in the evacuation when the White Helmets had to evacuate from the south after the regime took back these areas. At least 400 of them were evacuated through Israeli territory. So there was a kind of new development in which there would have been connecting points. But now when I learned that right in the moments when everybody in Syria moves to this terrible, notorious Naya prison, and there are so many families looking for their missing sons, fathers, daughters, aunts. In this moment, just around that facility, there were also plenty of bombardments. So this really shakes me because I think Syria has gone through so much and these people have gone through so much and they are facing these bombardments. So I think definitely it would be a very important point to make sure Syria has a chance to settle and find a way to deal with its own affairs. And then I think there are many things that I would also put on the list as good things and necessary things to do. But however, the most important would be not to put themselves, like we should not put ourselves in the driver's seat, but there are Syrians who have a plan and who have been working on that. So finding out what they find necessary and asking them also, what are the messages? If now we're traveling as diplomats to Damascus, what should we convey? What is civil society saying about the talking points that we have? Are these the right ones, or should there be other things that we demand?
Thank you, Bente. Maybe Razan and Mohammed, you also want to briefly comment on what Bente mentioned in terms of the messaging of some German politicians. I think it was already on 9th of December. We were still seeing the videos of, people trying to open cell doors with crowbars to get the prisoners out, and then already Jens Spahn, who is a Christian Democratic politicians, proposed to charter flights and give willing returnees €1,000 for their departure. And he added, especially young men who should want to help with the reconstruction of their home country. I mean, you both live in Germany, you found refuge here, but what does it do to you? How do you perceive such messaging? And how do you think it's going to shape the German-Syrian relationship?
From my end, I was just surprised. Like, I'm sure everyone in the audience knows of it or experienced the German bureaucracy. Like how in the first working day after like the fall of Assad, they managed to kind of even freeze all the applications that impact 40,000 people. And those are, the one person I know is actually the mother of my friend who's a doctor. So like it impacts also family reunification, like, and, Syrians living in Germany, experiencing, that agony, not knowing what will happen next. But I guess like I'll leave it to Muhammad as well. Like yeah, like just the fact that Syrians and refugees in general and migration rhetorics have been and continue to be used by politicians as tokens or like pawns. For me, it really like, get on my nerves. Like, خلاص, like I think the whole world need to stop using migration. The whole politicians need to stop migrants. This is human life and it needs to be respected. And if we are, telling the whole world, telling about rights and principles and values, I think we should just practice them and make sure even in the uttering the word is something as well, in addition to the facts and and the actual policies of migration.
Allow me, please, to show my frustration, because this is really, and I don't want to find nice word. This is disgraceful. Really, the timing is really disgraceful. I can't find. I wish I even find stronger words for that without cursing now, because it's not. Decent. And I have to add that this is, of course, it has a very negative impact on the Syrians who, in my opinion, generally in Germany and beyond, in the last years, they did notable efforts to integrate, to be part of the working force, to pay taxes, So this leaves really a big stain. I don't know how this will even be, even if they retreat from that, which I doubt, by the way. This will leave this stain on the conscience of Syrians who live here. And I have to add that this is just a new episode. I mean, putting things in seeing the larger picture and putting things in context. Yes, Germany, and rightly so, deserve praise and credit for opening up for Syrian refugees. But we have to remember, because sometimes I feel people either they don't know or they forgot that Germany opened up for those who made it through death journeys. No, it's so they really like risked their life to be on the gates of Germany and other countries. So imagine how Syrians felt when they saw how Ukrainian, for example, refugees were welcomed, and rightly so. Yeah, there is no competition in being refugee or in the no competition in misery. But I'm just putting the previous episodes of how Syrians and other refugees felt disheartened or felt being treated unfairly. And this last chapter is, as I say, it's shameful, disgraceful, because the moment that the Syrians are breathing for the first time like an air of freedom, and they are like about to close this horrific chapter of one of the ugliest dynasties and most brutal dynasties in the world, we have politicians in Europe like freezing, of course, the process of asylum for many, or even threatening or waiving like threats that we deport. And I have to say that this is also, and I hope for good, not just that people also take this seriously, not just refugees themselves, because I think people of the citizens of Germany, not the refugees, not even people from migrant backgrounds, need to take this seriously, because this is part of policies that are being steadily shifted to satisfy far-right discourse and far-right narrative. And this is dangerous also on other aspects, not just about the topic of migration and refugees. Somehow, the last decade or so, politicians from even center-left and, of course, center-right, they are shifting their policies steadily to satisfy potential voters, thinking they are very clever, so they can hijack or take some voters from the far right, which is not successful. I mean, the far right is getting stronger and stronger, and what is only successful is that the narrative of the far right is becoming the mainstream. So also this is something we need to think about. So this is not just the problem of refugees who are, of course, feeling disheartened or feeling like humiliated or feeling very like disappointed. It's also the problem of everyone in the society who believe in democracy and human rights and on the basic human rights. The question of just, I will briefly mention this and I will stop here. The question of whether Syrians want to go back or not, I think it's up to the Syrians. I can say personally about myself, about everybody I was speaking to, Syrians, like in the last days, everybody wants to go back. But how to go back? This is another thing. I mean, everybody wants to contribute. Everybody wants to play a role, especially these young women and men who've been tirelessly working for the future of Syria. This is the moment, no doubt. But you can't force people to go. You need to listen to their vision and how they want to make this transition, and how they want also to combine, as Razan mentioned in one of her previous answers, that people who are also have families, have now roots here, have work obligations here, not just ethical obligations, also contracts and work obligation, and they are also important for their new communities, like doctors, like engineers, like people working on also cultural sectors. I think also they can combine still being active here and also playing this role that they always wanted to play back in their home. So yeah, I will stop here.
Yes, maybe we should also add that not everybody has a home anymore in Syria. I mean, people also left for the destruction, and if host countries make them feel insecure about their return, then maybe even people who would like to go back to Syria won't go back because they're unsure of being able to return to Germany. I think that's also a consideration. Bente, you have just authored an article together with another colleague, Kirsten Krampe, about this. We will also post it in the chat, the link. actually the economy, I mean, many businesses, also hospital associations and so forth in Germany are already ringing the alarm bells and are saying, no, actually we depend on Syrian doctors, especially also on the countryside in smaller towns. We depend on them in many sectors of the economy. Can you maybe just briefly give us an idea of what your article is about, the main argument?
Well, I think it is mainly an article against this movement of immediately thinking of how to get rid of Syrians who have been with us here for so many years. And of course, these arguments are also mentioned, but we definitely also stress on that we can be happy to have Syrians just as neighbors and as friends here. I think it is also a community that grew. And I think for many people who came here and faced different displacements, because many didn't just come straight from there. They went through so many hardships, etc. Probably many of them might have also felt they found their place here. And this is also what I'm seeing in reports, that everybody is dreaming of going to Damascus. And I think everybody with their heart somehow stayed there. But it doesn't mean that it might be the right situation after constructing an entire new life here. And also based on the assumption that it will not soon go anywhere back. And so I think it was important for us to highlight it's not just that it would be useful to have Syrians here, but it's also they are part of society. When it comes to political parties, however, I'm also astonished because I think there are about 160,000, even more Syrians who over the years acquired a German passport. And so I'm absolutely astonished that parties don't seem to see them as potential voters. I think it is a relevant group, and therefore these remarks coming in that at that speed, it's unfortunate that we now have these snap elections. I think it might have been looking differently otherwise, but this is speeding everything up and catering to the populist parties.
Thank you very much, Bente. I would have liked to ask further questions on the deep trauma, how to deal with now with the prisons, the mass graves, and so forth. But I think it's also coming up in the questions, and we should now give time to the audience to ask their questions. So let me start with Eva. She says, Dear Razan and friends, I'm happy to see and hear you. How can I, as a former member of the European Parliament and International Women for Peace groups and co-author of the resolution 1325, try to support you now in the political negotiations with EU and the Syrian caretaker government? How can you build a platform for the multi-religious civil society? This is from Eva Quistorp from Berlin.
Do you want to take other questions or should I?
No, yeah, go.
Yeah, I think first, like there are like many platforms that I'm actually a founding member of a network called Madaniya, which brings together a big number of civil society organizations. Heinrich-Böll Foundation actually have brought us a lot, so many times over the years. There are a couple of other networks, so there's quite good, I would say, coordination and connection between civil society organizations. Sometimes I think the humanitarians versus the civil kind of or more like the rights-based organization, I think this is where we need to do more. But in terms of UN Security Council resolution on women, I think the most important thing to me today, practically, and I think it answers some of the other questions, is how the UN operation is dealing with the Damascus-based government. I'm sure a lot of research, and maybe the audience don't know, but there was a lot of work around how the Syrian government has pressured the UN in Damascus for years, and how aid diversion was an issue, but also compliance with the regulations put by the Assad regime on the UN operation. I would urge, for example, for the UN bodies not to actually continue to be just compliant to whatever the statu quo situation or the you know whatever the people in power tell them, but to commit to the humanitarian principles, to make sure that the programming is in line with, you know, gender-based lenses, and, you know, literally not to empower whatever you know, imposed, let's say, government. But at the same time, I would say, as Bente said, it's very early to tell exactly. We at the Syria campaign have just launched an open letter to Secretary General Guterres that is signed by, I think it's almost 1,000 now, women from Syria, having detailed demands in terms of women participation. And finally, I would like to say media and narrative, media. Today, all the information is happening online. There's a huge level of misinformation also. And the Syrian population are getting their news from random, from some of the amazing media initiatives that have started in Syria as well, but also from random YouTubers and celebrities online. So I think investing and collaborating with media organizations to showcase, you know, people like, you know, our work, when we showcase that women could be heroes, I think this is very important because it's only Syrians and Syrian women we will be able to, you know, take our rights, if that's the right English terminology. I hope that answers your question, Eva.
There are a couple of questions on how, in your view, Syrian democratic civil society groups could be included in the negotiations regarding reconstruction in Syria. If not, how can they be empowered? Then there's also a question, maybe I just collect them. Alf Mabruk to winning freedom. Congratulations to winning freedom. How do you see the challenge of navigating from the moment of complete revolutionary unity on December 8th to an establishment of a needed multi-party system that allows for means to organize different opinions and strong disagreements that are normal for every society? Maybe that also poses the question of, are there actually political parties? They're probably not. And what does that mean? And maybe a third question that goes into the same direction. Razan has explained how the fall of the Assad regime should not only be seen as the result of a military operation by HTS, and rightfully so, but has HTS already reached out to other parts of the Syrian civil society? And is it seeking their inclusion? So it's all about basically the inclusion of other groups. And yeah, what is your take on, is it happening sufficiently?
Ahmad, do you want to take that?
Okay, yeah, I'll try. Yes, I mean, Bente said something brilliant. I will borrow that. I mean, things cannot suddenly move to an ideal context just days after the regime fall. Really, I mean, I think as a Syrian who consider himself very connected to Syria and what's going on, and I personally cannot comprehend or still the scale of the destruction, this heavy legacy that we inherit from this brutal dynasty. So even us, I mean, people who are actually working on certain topics like related to the ground or related to economy, and because I'm also in constant dialogue with friends, they say they are still unable to comprehend the scale. So one thing we know for sure, that the needs are immense, and in all levels, really immense. We are below zero, if I might use this silly metaphor, in Syria. It's not even on the ground. We are really below, like. So we need to be realistic also about how we move forward, and that's why maybe I will speak about this. And I'm not a politician, I'm also I'm thinking all the time how we think or use this how to say the cornerstone that we have, which is the Security Council Resolution 2254, which is for many is the how to say the cornerstone or the base that we have to use to build on this political transition. How to use this, but not as a leverage, also not as a threat, also. So because yes, I'm concerned that the de facto current government or ruling elite in Syria now will impose maybe their policies, their personas. I have this concern, but at the same time, I don't think also we can use the resolution 2254 as a how to say as a again as a leverage and threats for not allowing subsidies or for ending the boycott. I don't know the word. The
sanctions.
The sanctions. Sorry, thank you very much. And this is a delicate. I don't have a very clear answer for that. I'm sure Benta and Razan will also jump in here. But I see that we need really to not to see things from different aspects. So our concerns as Syrians are legitimate from the current de facto government, but at the same time, discussion about sanctions need to be more flexible because I have all my family is in Damascus, many friends. They never left. And from just, we are not speaking politics now, really, we are still in the state of euphoria and celebration. But one thing we know from previous context and from previous stories of the successful revolutions is that this how to say state of euphoria will end soon, and then people will go back to confront the agonizing questions about daily living basics, things like this. And that's for me what could open up, considering the fragile situation on the ground, to a new cycle of violence. No, that could provoke actually more violent cycles in Syria, and that's why I think we need to make sure that support goes fast and in different actually places. Like Razan mentioned, of course, media. I will highlight the education as a very important thing to, of course, to start working on. Of course, we need to also highlight the writing a new constitution, but also we need to really stress the importance of the economy and of the basic needs, because again, this state of euphoria and celebration will end soon. And then, of course, the disagreements which are now circulated in civilized way might go to another form. And again, that's why I'm going back to mention the decision 2254. I think we need to think about the sanctions and the aid for Syria, not just from one angle, which is to impose a democratic political transition in Syria. We need to balance both. We need to combine our cautiousness about the de facto government and what's happening on the ground, but at the same time being fully aware that economy and basic needs need an urgent and immediate response.
Bente, would you like to comment on the issue of sanctions?
Yeah, I think we have, I mean, in the European Union, there are some sanctions that I think that still will make sense, because there are many sanctions on persons and entities directly involved in human rights violations. So we should not just, like as before, it never made sense to talk about lifting all the sanctions or as a blanket thing, but focusing on the ones that are relevant for money transfers to Syria, relevant to the economy, the banking sector, these sectoral things I think will be really relevant. And I think here, however, we have to take into consideration that UN sanctions top the ones of the EU, and US sanctions do so as well, which is quite complicated because there are different US sanctions mechanisms in place here. The Caesar sanctions are just one. There is the Magnitsky Act sanctioned entities, and I'm afraid that with the upcoming US administration of Trump, it might be difficult to even explain what the problem is. I think, therefore, it would make sense. There are people already working on that. I just read a paper this morning on what should be done to address that problem, and I think it's absolutely urgent to do that. I think also that from what was there before. There were many entities with which the authorities of Syria put front companies or entities that somewhere were with the regime, and they still are having all the contracts. I mean, there were so many First Lady organizations that then were part of aid distribution and part of aid diversion. So I think we should also deal with that issue to make sure that whatever is channeled into Syria has the opportunity to really reach people who are in need, and that it's needs-based, and that should have been at the focus of the humanitarian aid in Syria before. It was not completely. It was tried to improve that, but I think there were so many gaps. And I think now we should readdress also with whom are we currently having contracts and how can we do that. Also for Syrian exports, I think that matters, because apart from the sanctions that govern what can come into Syria, we also have export sanctions and on oil and gas, for example. And that is revenues that the Syrian state could have. I think the revision should also entail these.
Thank you. There's a question by Petra Becker. We can see on TikTok and Instagram that young people are being influenced to build an exclusive Muslim state in Syria. Russia, the old regime, and others will certainly boost this to have a Sisi moment in Syria. So Sisi, the president in Egypt, very authoritarian rule, also with the narrative of fighting against Islamists and terrorists and so forth. Who would like to take this question? And then also the second question attached to this, what can be done to push against this?
I can take on that. Sorry, I had something in mind. Now I forgot it. I guess, like, and I think someone also asked the question, and I wanted to note that there are a couple of things in the comments that Bente said around Israel having not only regular attacks on military bases in Syria, but also advancing in the buffer zone and in other villages, of Turkey proxy troops also today, like, fighting in the Kurdish communities. So, like, I believe there's a need for an actual ceasefire. So, like, we're not hearing about what's happening in Syria, but there needs to be a ceasefire, because the ceasefire will help also, you know, like, and how it will happen? It will happen by influencing whoever is supporting, those groups. Like, we know, like, for reality, that it is geopolitical implications as well in the country. And I think, what's happening online on TikTok, and as I said, is really crucial, because although, like, I'm really, really worried, and I think, again, it's not easy in 12 days to say how the next Syria would look like, or like to see all the indicators we want to see. But what is worrying is that I am worried about, like, changing one kind of dictator by the other, or like a kind of a figure. And that type of education in terms of citizenship, even Muhammad said, like, the first time I want to be a citizen, is very limited, and was even criminalized in Syria just to practice your citizenship. So the role of social media, tech companies, and the amount of funds that have been invested by the Assad regime and its allies, specifically Russia, is astonishing. And I do believe that, the European Union specifically, because there's a huge agenda on, again, maybe making my point on supporting the media initiative, supporting civil society, like those voices, engaging with artists and celebrities, because today they're really, really opinion leaders in what's going on in Syria. But we know that, as we just said, like, the UN as a mechanism is really important and will continue to be very important. So I think we need to hold them accountable as well in terms of the work that they're doing, and to make sure that all of those, like, um, post-conflict programming, which I'm sure we'll see a lot by, don't only speak about, protection of minority rights. And I think this is where I'm a little bit, concerned, even with Germany and the EU messaging, and some of the, more like rights-based, if we would say, approach, is like, we're concerned about minority rights and women. No, like, it should be civil liberties. I think the main message and the main um, criteria should be like civil liberties, and we haven't reached this point to only be cornered in, okay, if they protect minorities, then that's fine. They're doing a lot of like this government, or like this HTS appointed government is saying the right words. And I think, to answer again when another question that I saw, they're saying all the right words or giving all the right statements. So us Syrians and Syrians from within Syria and in the diaspora will continue to hold them accountable. But it is important for the UN as a state. My country, Syria, is a member of the General Assembly. We are a signatory of the CEDAW, the Women's Rights Convention. We are a signatory of the Child Rights Convention. How all of those kind of international legal frameworks that Assad and Russia made sure to make a mockery of with their disinformation work, even the convention on the provision of the use of chemical weapon, for example, and everything else becomes back on the table. We go back to our international global system and rebuild trust with the Syrian community, and especially again with the UN, because the UN have failed Syrians for so long, whether in the response to the humanitarian crisis that was imposed by Assad, whether in the response of the earthquake, and now in the response for the, specifically on the issue of the detainees and protecting documents. So how can we kind of also, I think this is, like this is exactly what we need to be doing as international community that believe in those systems. I'm going to stop here.
And specifically on the disinformation campaigns on TikTok, maybe it's also, maybe it's also really people calling for, I don't know, Muslim state in Syria, and then it's being amplified by disinformation campaigns and so forth. Would anyone of you like to add to that?
Yes,
how that could be countered?
Yeah, if I may allow to just make a comment. I think Syrians also deserve some trust. And here I'm stating facts. Till just weeks before HTS lead this sudden swift attack against the regime, till weeks before that date, there were large protests in Idlib province against Ahmed Shara, named Al-Jolani, and HTS. And this is, people can go and revisit these demonstrations. So this means that Syrians who were ruled actually already in Idlib province by the de facto power of HTS, they also stood up against certain violations. So we need to remember this. We need to also remember that Syrians learned something from the past 13 years. So they showed enough resilience. So with all respect to some concerns, and I have concerns personally, but some of these concerns come with a bit of ignorance, or a bit coming with good intention, but ignorance about maybe the Syrian context, or kind of underestimating the resilience that Syrians showed or could show. To ask a question, does that mean that there will be no other authoritarian or totalitarian regime in Syria, this time using Islam as a I don't know, an umbrella? I'm not saying no, but one thing for sure, this is maybe possibility, but one thing I'm certain of, the Syrians will not they will fight against any kind of authoritarian tendencies, including from the Islamists. So and that's why I encourage people not to jump to conclusions by watching just TikTok. And I'm not underestimating the role of social media here, but I'm just saying not to jump to conclusions and to put things within a context. And part of this context is that Syrian society in general, whether they are Muslims, Sunnis, or other sects, or Christians or Druze, they are conservative. It doesn't mean they are fanatic, but they are conservative. Religion for them is part of their identity, and they are proud about it. So sometimes maybe for people who are not able to tell the nuances, all these religious appearances lead to fanatism or radicalism, which is not true. So also we need to look at this and sometimes understand the nuances. So now it's the time where people, I think, need to show their disagreements, as long as this is solved or discussed in a civilized way in Syria, whether in ground or in the social media. That's okay. Actually, that is needed, because that's what one of the things that we deprived from through in 55 years of Assad rule is to disagree, is to show different political affiliation, is to show different political aspirations. We were deprived from politics. We were deprived from forming union. I never fought in my life. Literally, I never fought in a school, in a neighborhood. I never vote. I never cast a vote in my life, and millions of thousands like me. So this is the time also. It's okay to show disagreements. It's okay to show different aspiration and different visions for what Syria could be, as long as within a civilized manner, of course. So we don't have to always panic from similar phenomena.
There's a question from Muriel Asseburg. She's asking about Razan and Muhammad, what you see as the main challenges in the political transitions, and which support you wish from Germany and the EU. I think you've already spoken about that. I don't know if you want to add, but importantly, she's also asking which approaches you don't consider to be helpful. So maybe you want to concentrate on that. Is there anything that you think should absolutely not be done right now?
Maybe I would re-stress this whole focus of protection of minorities and women as, just, as alien, and really like focus on general like civil liberties in terms of, how do we look at the transition. And I guess the other thing would be really, and I think in reflection to the question about policies in Germany as well, and how not to underestimate, the power of collaboration between different, communities as well. And yeah, like I think, I kind of said that before, but talk to Syrians and not create, just like parachute again, programs that were maybe helpful in the 1990s, but today, as we just had a question about TikTok, I don't think last year we would even have it in such a format or in this kind of type of community, just to accept that also the world is very different, and we have AI today, like, connecting a lot of the dots maybe between different communities. That would be like my kind of 2 cents, maybe.
If I will may I add something very quickly, Laila, sorry for not because it was not mentioned before. Actually, it was mentioned clearly, and thank you, Penta, for mentioning that. But because I really want to stress and highlight that because it's important. I think what Germany and Europe can do is really to pressure their friends and allies not to intervene in Syria. Because again, really, this is a very, very fragile moment in the modern history of Syria. This is a historic moment that we have where we can hopefully move from Assad era to something more promising and something what Syrians really deserves. So I think Germany and European Union has a leverage to an extent on Turkey, on Israel, of course. They didn't exercise this leverage on Israel when it comes to the war on Gaza, for example, but I hope in Syria they can, because we are too busy now, of course, focusing on how the situations are unfolding in Damascus and other Syrian cities, but we are not paying enough attention, in my humble opinion, to what the Israeli is doing in the Golan Heights and the expansion there and the threats that they are really presenting for the whole situation in Syria. The same with Turkey, the same with other countries. Iran is still there. Russia is still there, of course, but especially the allies of Germany and European Union, or the countries that Germany has a leverage on, our European Union. This is very important. Syrians really need time to figure out their situation by themselves without intervention, especially military intervention. This is very, very important. And the other thing that we already mentioned, I hope the question of refugee and migration would be approached by more rationality, by more decency. Yeah.
Thank you. There's about 3 more questions I would like to take. So please, if you can keep your answers brief, but I would just really like the audience to participate. There's a question by Karl Lauer, and he's saying, how do you envisage should those responsible for the inhumanity and oppression that took place in Syria in the last decades be held responsible for their acts? Who of you would like to take this?
I can go on,
Razan?
given this is something we work on at the Syria campaign, and I think, we definitely need to see justice, and we need to see war criminals being trialed. Otherwise, we cannot move on and heal and reconcile. And I think the experience of Germany is, something that have taught us a lot. And I think definitely, whether in national courts or even international courts. And I hope really the whole world pressure Russia to, give up on supporting Assad, because if he's not behind bars, many, like literally millions of victims will not, have any sort of justice.
Thank you. There were a couple of questions asking which Syrian organizations could be supported right now. Do you have recommendations? Syria campaign, of course, but maybe also others.
Yeah, I would think of Women Now, definitely the White Helmets, who are, working a lot on mass graves. I can think of a lot, but maybe those two and would be it.
And maybe a final question. Sorry, there's so many questions here. NGOs that used to operate within Syria with ties to the regime, do you see problems with HTS letting them operate in the future?
Maybe Bente can take that one.
Well, I mean, we all can't look to the future, and of course, whatever we hope for, that should be formulated now. I'm just concerned sometimes about the tone and about the priorities set in what we ask for. I mean, so far, what we have been seeing have been that, particularly regarding the Christians, I think they have been very careful to have in Aleppo a situation in which they could continue like preparations for Christmas, and we saw like the videos from Aleppo where I mean I think authentic citizens were authentically expressing like that they are continuing with everything as they planned. But we don't have guarantees, and we don't have a unified movement here as well. I mean, you also have to think about how they are organized, how they have all kind of different backgrounds, and for many who participated now in the offensive, the motivation was just going home also. So I think we have not a very clear picture of the entire group. We just hear some prominent statements. And if I think I would say what should happen is that not everybody travels to Damascus and takes a picture with Jolani, because that would embolden him and give him a legitimacy that I think he does not have. Also, he is not part of this interim government, so I don't understand the frenzy about that. And yeah, we should definitely keep track of interests that should be formulated in a way that is how we hear it from our Syrian partners and friends.
Thank you very much. There are more questions. I'm afraid I cannot take them all.
I just have a quick comment, Leila. Sorry, if I may. It's actually related to the last two questions. For example, like, do we work with structures that were already operating under Assad? I think this is also linked to the question of justice that also Razan addressed briefly before. In my opinion, it's a very important topic, and it's one, of course, we have to think a lot about it carefully, because the scale of violations here is huge, and I'm of course focusing on the last decade or so of the civil war, or the proxy war, how I prefer to name it, but also the years before the half a century or more of Assad regime. Nepotism is something that was the premises of this regime. So a lot of Syrians were also involved, whether they liked or not, whether it was imposed on them or it was a free choice. They were involved in human rights violations. So when we I think approach a scale like this, like what happened in Syria, we need to really be realistic about the accountability. So I'm saying that to say, I mean, at least how I see it from my practice, that we need to accept that we will coexist, we will work, we will with people who we knew that they maybe were on the other side, or even they were involved somehow. But of course, we have to hold certain people accountable, the masterminds behind the atrocities, mainly from the regime, but from all other fractions, people who were responsible, like to mobilize and to organize atrocities. For sure, I think it will be hard, really, to move on with any democratic transition or any transition at all without holding certain people accountable and bring them to justice. But beside that, we need to be realistic that we have to coexist, we have to live. And we have many examples: Germany, of course, South Africa, Rwanda, and elsewhere. So where people have to move on and swallow some bitterness and some pain for the sake to build something together. But that will not, of course, happen unless we bring closure to certain cases. And the priority is the missing file, of course, which is one of the most agonizing topic and file for Syrians. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed, for saying that again. We are at the end, unfortunately. Usually I say some last words, but after thanking the speakers very much and the audience, of course, my colleague Luisa Reh for organizing this and for her support, and the interpreters, I would today like to give the last words to Razan. You are a young mother. You had a child not long ago. Just tell us in few words, what do you wish for your child?
Oh my God, I thought we ran out of time. Yeah, I just wish him to be an active citizen anywhere and practice freedom and say the things he'd like to say and live the way he'd like to live. And thank you, Layla, for organizing and inviting.
Thank you, Razan. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Bente. Thank you, everyone. And see you soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you, Layla, everyone. And translation, thank you. Sorry if we were fast sometimes.
Thank you. I want to thank Layla and because also your support and involvement in the Syrian cause has been not just today, it's been for years. So I appreciate, and I really thank you for that. And I thank the translators for keeping up. I'm sorry if we were not very clear sometimes. Yeah. And thank you for having us and organizing this. And I wish to meet you in real life soon. Yeah.
Thank you, Mohammed. Bye-bye.